Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And I am super excited because tonight marks the beginning of my lists of 2019. Yes, multiple lists, because this time around I'm doing something a little bit different. I have a bunch of lists that I want to go over from now until the end of January. So keep your eyes peeled for all of these videos. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope that all my hard work over the last few weeks will pay off in these videos. Tonight, we are starting off with something a little bit different. For those of you who don't know, the biggest reason why I don't put out my end of the year lists until January is because once December hits, usually there are a handful of CDs that I miss that the public is really high on, whether that's because I just didn't hear of those albums or I didn't have the time or interest in that moment to take a listen to those albums. So usually I wait until everyone has made their list so that I can check out some things that I miss and then give my own opinions and hopefully have the most concise and well-rounded list that I can have. At the beginning of the 2010s, usually how I would do that was by looking at the Rolling Stone Top 50. Those lists were basically the reason why I started doing album reviews on my channel and started listening to more music, because every year I would look at them and there would be so many head-scratching albums that were on there that it made me want to be my own guide when it comes to listening to music. So I would listen to those albums and then make my top 50 once I combined it with everything from Rolling Stone. And yes, there was plenty of stuff that I came to really like. For example, I got into the New Pornographers because of their ranking of Whiteout Conditions from 2016. So there are some good things that come from it, but I personally would rather take the time and effort to listen rather than be guided in a certain way. Recently, though, I stumbled onto a website that is perfect for situations like this. I don't remember if I stumbled onto myself or if I heard it from Anthony Fantano. Either way, it's an amazing website, and it's called albumoftheyear.org. Now, this website is basically a consensus piling of every single top 50, top 100 lists of the year, of the decade, whatever you are looking for. They afterwards rank it and come up with the consensus top 50. Now, this one takes a little bit more time though, because there are over 100 different websites and publications that make a top 50, top 20, top whatever list, and then they have to compile it afterwards. Usually because of that, it takes a little bit longer, about until like mid-January, to be able to know what the consensus top 50 is and then to have to listen to all of it. Luckily this time around, I started early and I had listened to a majority of them before even this list came out. I'm in a much better position to be able to do my top 50 this time around. But I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what the consensus top 50 is before I delve into my own. For those of you who would like to have a link to the list that I'm looking at, you go to https://www.albumoftheyear.org/list/summary/2019. You can look back at other consensus album of the year lists as well. And another really cool thing is you can click on any of these albums that are on the consensus, find out who picked what, and from there see what their review was, where they ranked it. You can even click on all the publications and look at their own top 50 lists that way too. It's a great hub to see what everyone does. And just to let you know, there is a lot of publications that go into this. This time around there was 127 lists created as of this date. So there might be more later. There might be albums that come onto here that I never got the chance to listen to, but I'm only doing from where it is now. So bear in mind with me if there is any other changes. I'm going to go through each of the numbers in top 50, going from 50 up to 1. Just doing a little quick couple sentences on these so that we don't waste a lot of time in this video. I'm going to be looking at my phone at times, so if I look down, it's only because of that. I'll also give a little hint as to ones that may or may not make my top 50 or my honorable mentions. This time around, there's going to be a lot of honorable mentions, so stay tuned for that video. First though, I want to talk about a couple of honorable mentions on this page because you're going to just see how many honorable mentions there are and just like how all over the board this is. Just off the top of the bat, one that just missed the top 50, JPEG Mafia, All My Heroes Are Cornballs, an album that I've heard a lot of people talk about as one of their favorite rap albums of the year. Not necessarily one of my favorites, but an interesting album nonetheless. Another solid rap album that is just missing the cut is Eve by Rhapsody. One that has a little bit of a more interesting approach, talking about certain women in history and using a narrative rap story approach I found really interesting. Just going down the list, we got Lingua Ignota, Miss the Cut, Denzel Curry, The High Women, Slipknot, Miss the Cut, Billy Woods and Kenny Siegel, the Beyonce Homecoming Live album, Flying Lotus, Sturgill Simpson, Maggie Rogers, Richard Dawson, Pup, Sun O, Young Thug, Chemical Brothers, Baroness, The Baby, two The Baby albums I guess, Wilco, Anderson .Paak, Mark Ronson, Rammstein, so many people that you probably have heard of miss the cut. But that just shows how strong this year is. Now, whether or not I like all these ones, that's up for debate. But just to let you know that those are the ones that missed the cut. So now let's go over quickly just what the scoring system is. So basically, how this works is if you got a first place vote on any list that is worth 10 points. Second place was 8 points. Third place was 6 points. In the top 10, you get 5 points. In the top 25, you get 3 points. And then anything on the list would be 1 point. So as you'll probably see, once we get into that 50 range for a little bit, it's going to be pretty close in terms of points. Starting off, number 50 with 47 points, we have Jessica Pratt with Quiet Signs. This is a really weird album for me. I love a lot of the instrumentation on here. I love a lot of the arrangements. I think it's one of the more beautiful albums of the year, if not for one thing. Jessica Pratt's voice is very hard to, unfortunately, take serious. It has a little bit of a Mickey Mouse-esque kind of voice, very cartoonish, if you will. And to me, it's not something that I find hugely interesting. It's a disappointing album because I would love to have loved the whole entire album, and it's pretty quick. It's probably about 30 minutes, but one that just unfortunately didn't gel because of the vocals. Number 49 with 48 points, we got Rae Jepsen with Dedicated. I've never really listened to much of Rae Jepsen, even though I know that a lot of her recent albums have become very popular. From what I understand, Dedicated feels a little bit like Emotion, which to me is not necessarily a bad thing. I enjoyed my first listen. It's right around that edge of being on my list or not. I still have to figure out a couple of different things in terms of some of these albums, but it is one that I'm keeping my eye on. Number 48 is Barker with Utility with 49 points. The cool thing about this album of the year site is not only does it do stuff from the United States, but it does also focus on some sites that are more United Kingdom, all across Europe. And because of that, you get certain bands that are more mainstays in the United Kingdom, in England, that maybe people in the United States will not know, and this is particularly one of them. Barker is all instrumental. It's more kind of like techno house, very meditative, and it was solid. Short album, just not necessarily my style, and you'll see that a couple times on this list. Number 47, Charlie Bliss with Young Enough. Never heard of this band until this list. They are a pop punk band. Enjoy their style. Not bad. The vocals aren't that great to me, and it just doesn't stand out comparatively with everything else from this year. But they get 51 points, so it found a spot on this list. It wouldn't find a spot on mine. Number 46, Kim Gordon with No Home Record with 52 points. I'm not going to talk a lot about this one because this one's going to show up on my next list. But let me tell you something. This was a trudge to get through. Kim Gordon, for you who don't know, that she's one of the members of Sonic Youth, and honestly, this was not an interesting album to me. I don't know why so many people voted for this album. I gotta listen to it again, but honestly, it's one of the more disappointing albums I listened to all year. Number 45, Megan Thee Stallion with Fever, which got 54 points. I'm not someone who really likes this style of rap, but it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of silly fun. A lot of these songs are really fun, tongue-in-cheek. It has a lot of bravado. It was a good album. That being said, it didn't make my cut. A lot of these songs feel a little bit too similar, even though the nice thing about it is they are short, so they don't overstay their welcome. This is just how strong this year was, where it just missed my cut because of just what was around it. Number 44 with 54 points, we have 100 gecs with 1,000 gecs. Very short, very erratic album, really weird. Not my cup of tea. I'm not a huge fan of the auto-tuned vocals, but still a very erratic album. And for those who are looking for something a little bit weirder side, this was not a bad listen. Number 43 with 57 points, we got Jenny Caval with The Practice of Love. Kind of artsy, experimental art pop. Not necessarily, again, my cup of tea, so it wasn't on my list, but for those who were looking for something like that, it's not bad. It has some spoken word poetry, has some interesting ideas, just overall wasn't a huge fan of it. Number 42 with 58 points, we have The Comet is Coming with Trust in the Life Force of the Deep Mystery. For those of you who remember me talking about Sons of Kemet last year on my top 50 list, some of the members from Sons of Kemet are in The Comet is Coming. And this was a more fun album to listen to than Sons of Kemet to me. This is one of the ones I was actually going to do an argue in on, and I'll probably discuss it a little bit more because it did make my top 50 list. I find this one a little bit more interesting than the Sons of Kemet one because the instrumentation is more diverse, and because of that the arrangements are a little bit more diverse. A fun jazz album if you have not listened to it. Number 41 with 59 points is Kate LeBond with Reward. Not a huge fan of this one either. It was a little bit, another one of these more experimental folky pop with weird saxophone passages. It was not really memorable to me. Because of that, didn't make my list. Number 40 with 61 points, The National with I Am Easy to Find. Easily my favorite National album that I have listened to. I think it's a little bit less monotone. I like the inclusion of a lot of female vocalists as guest appearances. There's a lot of really good songs on the album. However, I think, as you'll see with some other albums on this list, the problem I have with it is with it being so long, it has to be perfect, or close to perfect. Some of the songs, some of the intros are not really interesting to listen to. The beginning of the album is a lot weaker than the ending of the album. So unfortunately, this did not make my lists at all, which is surprising. After reviewing this album, I definitely thought it was going to make at least my honorable mentions, but that's how great this year was. Number 39 with 61 points, we have Charlie XCX with Charlie, a really futuristic pop album. And with all the pop albums that missed my cut, this one was probably the best out of all of them. I like the futuristic ideas. I'm just not much of a pop person, and it just did not resonate with me as with some other people. Number 38 with 62 points, we got Bruce Springsteen with Western Stars. This is the album that made me become a Bruce Springsteen fan. There's so many interesting narratives on here, even if some of the songs do feel very similar. It's enjoyable. I really enjoy it, and it definitely found a spot in my lists. Number 37 with 62 points, we have Floating Points with Crush. Another one of these more trancey, house, techno-ish albums. This one feels a little bit more experimental and a little bit more atmospheric than the Barker album. Out of the two, I definitely would have had this one on my list because of just how much more experimenting and how much more diversity there was on here. But to be honest, this one did not make my list either because, again, it wasn't interesting enough for me to have it in any of my lists. Number 36 with 63 points, we have Jenny Lewis with On the Line. Another one of these like folkish pop that had some tinges of like 60s and 70s era kind of vibe at times. Not bad, just not really memorable to me. Number 35 with 66 points, we have Danny Brown with You Know What I'm Saying. This Danny Brown album is the most accessible one, and because of that, to me, it is my favorite. Danny Brown gets a little bit out there with his arrangements sometimes on previous albums. I'm not a huge fan of Atrocity Exhibition. I'm not a huge fan of his previous works, but this one would make me go back to it because it shows off that he has a great flow and a great style and a great sense of humor, and a lot of these arrangements are very memorable, at least on my end, so it definitely made a spot on my list. Number 34 with 66 points, we have Kano with Hoodies All Summer. This is a rapper from the UK who on this one talks a lot about the political strife in the UK after Brexit, especially with race relations. Really solid album. Kano has a really solid flow, really memorable to me. Definitely made my list. Number 33, we have, with 68 points, Sandy Alex G with House of Sugar. A lot of people talk about this person. I don't see the appeal. Was not really memorable to me at all. Even though it has some diversity, I don't really find his style of singing that interesting, and a lot of the arrangements left a lot to be desired. Number 32 with 69 points, we have Julia Jacqueline with Crushing. This is the last album that I listened to from this list because at first it just disappeared and then it finally showed up again in such a high point. I'm glad that I finally did because it has that acoustic indie vibe that I love. I really enjoyed Julia's singing on here. It's a really solid album that may or may not make my list. I still have to listen to it again before I can make a final decision, but it is showing promise. Number 31, we have Taylor Swift with Lover. After Reputation, this is a much better album. This is only the second album I've listened to her all the way through, and I found some of it enjoyable, but like with The National, this one feels a little bit bloated, and not everything it comes out smelling like roses, so it did not make my list. I know this looks a little bit different, but I barely have any room to charge my computer, so here we are. Let's continue. Number 30, we have at 74 points, James Blake with Assumed Form. My first James Blake, actually my second James Blake album that I listened to. That's kind of how I feel about this. James Blake with, I believe it was Overgrown. I wasn't a huge fan with that one. This one is a little bit more diverse. I like some of it, but it kind of starts really slow and ends not the best. So did not make any of my list, but it came close. Number 29 with 74 points, we have Thom Yorke with Anima. The lead singer of Radiohead comes back with another solo work, and this one is a lot of fun in a dystopian way, if you will. A lot of really solid songs on there, and a lot of really interesting groups that kind of remind me a lot of the King of Limbs era, which I find enjoyable. So it did just enough to make it to my lists. Number 28 with 79 points, we have Bill Callahan with Shepherd in a Sheepskin's Vest. Try to say that 3 times fast. First time I listened to it, did not find it that enjoyable, but as I listened to it more, I enjoyed the storytelling. Bill Callahan's voice is really smooth, very pleasant to listen to. It is a longer album, but there's enough there with the storytelling that I find interesting in comparison to like a Mark Kozlik, if you will. Number 27 with 81 points, and that's Fear Inoculum. The first real head scratcher to me on this list in terms of it just being so low. Now, bear in mind, a lot of the publications aren't focusing a lot on rock. If you were looking at this list day by day, it started off with some rock stuff, and that's because usually those are the first publications that come out with their end of the year list, so it kind of looks good. Hey, maybe there's a chance that rock can do well. Fortunately, in these times, rock isn't the most dominating genre, and it shows with these consensus top 50 lists. Fear Inoculum is a phenomenal CD. It definitely is vying for one of my top spots on my list. It's a great comeback album from this band who's been gone for over a decade. It's a little bit long, yes. Is it as memorable as Lateralis or 10,000 Days or Enema? Not necessarily in my book, but it's still a great comeback and one who, if you haven't listened to yet, you definitely should. Keep on the lookout for this one in my list. Number 26, we have Boney M III with I, which got 88 points. Pretty solid placing for this particular album. It doesn't hit the highs to me as 22 Million, but it's a little bit more diverse and it has a lot of great messages in here. It does have some weird endings to songs and it gets strange at times, but still a solid follow-up to 22 Million, though if you haven't listened to 22 Million, definitely take the time to listen to it. One of my favorite albums of the decade.